Welcome to Preeminent Test Prep. Today I'll be taking you through the reading section of SAT Practice Test 9. I'll be giving you my tips and tricks for the reading section, as well as answer explanations for each question. Make sure to subscribe for more content, and let's go ahead and get into question 1, or passage 1. So I'm going to read the passage, and then I'll go into the questions. So if you've already read the passage, you can go ahead and skip to the questions. They'll be about 3 minutes later, because that's how long it'll take me to read this. So we have the passages adopted from Amy Tan, The Bone Setter's Daughter, in 2001 by Amy Tan. At last old Widow Lowe was done haggling with the driver, and we stepped inside Father's shop. It was north-facing, quite dim inside, and perhaps this was why Father did not see us at first. He was busy with a customer, a man who was distinguished-looking, like the scholars of 2 decades before. The two men were bent over a glass case, discussing the different qualities of ink sticks. Big Uncle welcomed us and invited us to be seated. From his formal tone, I knew he did not recognize who we were. So I called his name in a shy voice, and he squinted at me, then laughed and announced our arrival to Little Uncle, who apologized many times for not rushing over sooner to greet us. They rushed us to be seated at one of the 2 tea tables for customers. Old Widow Lowe refused their invitation 3 times, exclaiming that my father and uncles must be too busy for visitors. She made weak efforts to leave. On the 4th insistence, we finally sat. Then Little Uncle brought us hot tea and sweet oranges, as well as bamboo latticework fans with which to cool ourselves. I tried to notice everything, so I could later tell Gua Long what I had seen, and tease out her envy. The floors of the shops were of dark wood, polished and clean, no dirty footprints, even though this was during the dustiest part of the summer, and along the walls were display cases made of wood and glass. The glass was very shiny, and not one pane was broken. Within those glass cases were our silk-wrapped boxes, all our hard work. They looked so much nicer than they had in the ink-making studio at Immortal Heart Village. I saw that Father had opened several of the boxes. He set sticks and cakes and other shapes on a silk cloth covering a glass case that served as a table on which he and the customers leaned. First he pointed to a stick with a top shaped like a ferry boat and said with graceful importance, "Your writing will flow as smoothly as a keel cutting through a glassy lake." He picked up a bird shape. "Your mind will soar into the clouds of higher thought." He waved toward a row of ink cakes embellished with designs of peonies and bamboo. "Your ledgers will blossom into abundance while bamboo surrounds your quiet mind." As he said this, precious Auntie came back into mind. I was remembering how she taught me that everything, even ink, had a purpose and a meaning. Good ink cannot be the quick kind, ready to pour out of a bottle. You could never be an artist if your work comes without effort. That is the problem of modern ink from a bottle. You do not have to think. You simply write what is swimming on the top of your brain, and the top is nothing but pond scum, dead leaves, and mosquito spawn. But when you push an ink stick along an inkstone, you take the first step to cleansing your mind and your heart. You push and you ask yourself, what are my intentions? What is it in my heart that matches my mind? I remembered this, and yet that day in the ink shop, I listened to what Father was saying, and his words became far more important than anything precious Auntie had thought. "Look here," Father said to his customer, and I looked. He held up an ink stick and rotated it in the light. "See, it's the right hue, purple-black, not brown or gray like the cheap brands you might find down the street. And listen to this," and I heard a sound as clean and pure as a small silver bell. The high-pitched tone tells you that the suit is very fine, as smooth as the sliding banks of the old rivers. And the scent, can you smell the balance of strength and delicacy, the musical notes of the ink's perfume? Expensive, and everyone who sees you using it will know that it is well worth the high price. I was very proud to hear Father speak of our family's ink this way. Alright, question 1. Which choice best summarized the passage? Well, we want to come up with our own answer before we look at our answer choices. We know that we have a character who arrives at her family's ink shop, but it says that she's visiting, right? So she's visiting her family's ink shop. We know that she is visiting with her aunt, right? She remembers what her aunt said about how we need to have deliberate effort when we're writing things in order to make them worthwhile. And then we also close with how she appreciates her family's ink and her father discussing how good quality the ink is, right? So now we look at our answer choices. We have A character's arrival at her family's ink shop sparks fond memories of her aunt. Well, it does spark fond memories of her aunt. That's missing our whole last part, right? The whole pretty much second half of it where it talks about how she's so proud of the quality and of the ink that her dad makes, right? Her family's ink shop, and how proud she is of it, how her dad does such a good job. So we can get rid of A. B, a character's surprise visit leads to a happy reunion. No, right? There's not really any reunion between her and her father, right? They're just kind of both there, and she's noticing what he's saying to a customer. C, a character comes to understand her father's ambitions while visiting her family's ink shop. Well, she's not really coming to understand her father's ambitions, right? His ambitions are never discussed. He's just trying to sell the ink. And then D, a character's visit to her family's ink shop. That's correct. Deepens her appreciation of her family's work, right? The whole point of kind of her aunt's her aunt's story about how the thing on top of your brain when you don't put effort into stuff is pond scum is kind of to show how she really appreciates the quality of her family's work because it takes time, right? And it's so valuable and it's of great quality, so our answer there is D. Question 2. A main theme of the passage is that A. Family relationships should be nurtured. No. B. Qualities achieved through deliberate effort. Yes, right? That was the whole point of that story with her aunt, right? The main theme is that, hey, this ink shop, everything there is quality, and it takes a lot of time to get that quality. And then we also have that supported by that aunt's story about how the stuff on the top of your brain is pond scum, but when you're deliberate, that's when you get quality. So our answer there is going to be B. All right, question 3. Throughout the passage, the narrator is portrayed as someone who is what? All right, well, this one, we want to come up with like an adjective, right, for how the narrator is portrayed. Well, if we think about it, she's really in tune with all her surroundings, right? So that would be something we could focus on. She's in tune with her surroundings, right? She's talking about how everything looks. She's talking about what people are saying. So now we look through our answer choices. We have A, reserved around unfamiliar people. Well, we don't really talk about anyone unfamiliar other than the customer, and she doesn't really act or react with him, right? And then B, attuned to her immediate surroundings. Yep, she's describing everything around her, what her dad's saying, what her aunt's saying. She recalls things her aunt has said. C, sympathetic to the needs of others. There aren't any needs of others discussed. D, anxious about her responsibilities. She's never described as anxious, right? Or really given any responsibilities. Question 4, it can be most reasonably inferred from the passage that old widow Lowe's reluctance to stay for tea is what? Well, it's feigned, right? Because she's not actually generally firm in her resolve. She doesn't actually want to leave, right? She does want to stay. She just says that she doesn't so that she can kind of appear polite, right? So we can go ahead and get rid of B, C, and D. And my next question asks for evidence, so I can actually go ahead and support A for you guys. So as I go back to the text, I'm not even going to look at the right where it says it because I already know what I'm talking about. When I go back, I know where it says that her resolve is feigned, right? It's where she says that after 3 attempts, right? And then it says, let me see if I can find it, right? Old widow refused their invitation 3 times, exclaiming to my father and uncle, must be too busy for visitors. And then here's my evidence here. She made weak efforts to leave, right? Weak efforts to leave means that she didn't really make any strong effort to leave. She was just kind of doing it to be polite, right? So that's going to be my answer there, and that is line 18, right? So I need that leave. I see I've got lines 15 to 18, right? And that part that preceded it was just talking about pretty much leading into it saying that she made weak efforts to leave. So I know C is my answer there. Now I got question 6. The narrator indicates the contrast between the ink-making studio at Immortal Heart Village and her family's ink shop is that the ink shop, well, first thing I want you guys to understand, Immortal Heart Videos is the ink-making studio, so when we're talking the ink shop, we're talking about her family's, right? Well, if we go back up, right, it says that her family's ink shop displayed all their ink in these nice glass cases, right, with not a single pane was broken. So that's going to be A. The ink shop displays the family's ink much more impressively, right? It doesn't talk about being conveniently located or providing greater individual attention or offering a greater space. All right, and then question 7. Based on the artistic philosophy expressed in the 4th paragraph, lines 46 to 59, it is reasonable to infer that Precious Auntie would consider a hastily written first draft of a story. And then here we're going to have to provide evidence anyway, so we can go back to 46 and 59, come up with our own answer. All right, we got 46 to 59. This is where she's talking about how the stuff on the top of your head is pond scum, dead leaves, and mosquito spawn, right? It's not worth anything of value. It's not quality. So that's going to be our support for our claim then that if you were to do something hastily, right, and just make it off the top of your head, it's not of quality and it's not really worth anything. So our evidence then is going to be from 52 to 55. So I'm going to go down. It's on question 7. Go ahead and circle C, and I know my answer choice has to say something about how something hastily written first draft of a story would be essentially worthless in and of itself, right? It's going to be pond scum, mosquito spawn, right? And that's what we have in our evidence as well. So our answer for 7 is C, and 8 is C as well. Question 9, as used in line 59, matches most nearly means. We go to line 59, we're going to square matches, right? And then we're going to read our sentence and find what a good word, like what it means, right? Like what a good synonym to put in place of it would be. So we have, what is in my heart that matches my mind? Well, what jumps out to me right away, what in her heart, right, has to correspond with what's in her mind. They have to be 2 things that are similar, right? They have to correspond with each other. What's in her heart needs to correspond with her mind. So I go down, I see I have corresponds with B. It's not going to compete against, right? They have to match up. It's not going to run counter to because they have to match up. And it doesn't have to treat equally, right? What's in her mind isn't treating anything in her, I think it said body, right? What's in my, okay, and my heart has to correspond with my mind. Yeah, your heart's not treating your mind with anything, right? but those ideas need to correspond to each other. As used in line 68, clean most nearly means, we're going to use the same strategy we just used. So I go find clean, and that is here in line 68. I'm going to read the sentence. And I heard a sound as clean and pure as a small silver bell. All right, well, a small silver bell, right? We can all kind of picture that if you were to like put a little ting on a small silver bell, the sound it would make, right? It's very distinct. You would hear that word, right? So we have, and I heard a sound as clean and pure. So now in my mind, I'm thinking distinct, right? Something that's very recognizable. So I'm going to go down, look at my answer choices. I see I have distinct here in C, but if I'm going to look at my other answer choices, say I didn't come up with distinct, I know it's not going to be complete because we don't describe sounds as complete. We don't describe sounds as skillful. We don't describe sounds as upright. Our upright talks about position. We are definitely not going to describe a sound with upright, but we would describe a sound as distinct with answer choice C. So now we can go ahead and move on to passage 2. So we've got passage 2, questions 11 to 20 are based on the following passage and supplementary material. This passage is adopted from How the Web Affects Memory, written in 2011 by Harvard Magazine, Inc. Search engines have changed the way we use the internet, putting vast sources of information just a few clicks away. But Harvard professor of psychology Daniel Wegner's recent research proves that websites and the internet are changing much more than technology itself. They are changing the way our memories function. Wegner's latest study, Google Effects on Memory, Cognitive Consequences of Having Information at Our Fingertips, shows that when people have access to search engines, they remember fewer facts and less information because they know they can rely on search as a readily available shortcut. Wegner, the senior author of the study, believes the new findings show that the internet has become part of a transactive memory source, a method by which our brains compartmentalize information. First hypothesized by Wegner in 1985, a transactive memory exists in many forms, as when a husband relies on his wife to remember a relative's birthday. It is this whole network of memory where you don't have to remember everything in the world yourself, he says. You just have to remember who knows it. Now computers and technology as well are becoming virtual extensions of our memory. The idea validates habits already forming in our daily lives. Cell phones have become the primary location for phone numbers. GPS devices in cars removed the need to memorize directions. Wegner points out that we never have to stretch our memories too far to remember the name of an obscure movie actor or the capital of Kyrgyzstan. We just type our question into Google. We become part of the internet in a way, he says. We become part of the system and we end up trusting it. Working with researchers Betsy Sparrow of Columbia University and Jenny Liu of the University of Wisconsin-Madison, Wegner conducted 4 experiments to demonstrate the phenomenon, using various forms of memory recall to test reliance on computers. In the first experiment, participants demonstrated that they were more likely to think of computer terms like Yahoo or Google after being asked a set of difficult trivia questions. In 2 other experiments, participants were asked to type a collection of readily memorable statements, such as an ostrich's eye is bigger than its brain. Half the subjects were told that their work would be saved to a computer. The other half were informed that the statements would be erased. In subsequent memory testing, participants who were told their work would not be saved were best at recalling the statements. In a 4th experiment, participants typed into a computer statements they were told would be saved in specific folders. Next, they were asked to recall the statements. Finally, they were given cues to the wording and asked to name the folders where the statements were stored. The participants proved better able to recall the folder locations than the statements themselves. Wegner concedes that questions remain about whether dependence on computers will affect memories negatively. Nobody knows now what the effects are of these tools on logical thinking. Students who have trouble remembering distinct facts, for example, may struggle to employ those facts in critical thinking, but he believes that the situation overall is beneficial, likening dependence on computers to dependence on a mechanical hand or on other prosthetic device. And even though we may not be taxing our memories to recall distinct facts, we are still using them to consider where the facts are located and how to access them. We still have to remember things, Wegner explains. We're just remembering a different range of things. He believes his study will lead to further research into understanding computer dependence and looks forward to tracing the extent of human interdependence with the computer world, pinpointing the movable dividing line between us and our computers in cyber networks. Now we're given a table, and now we have question 11. All right, the main purpose of the passage is to what? Well, the main purpose of the passage is, right, to share the findings of these 4 trials or experiments, right, and talk about how memory is being, not memory, but how technology is transforming our memories and how we are now remembering where to find things rather than the information itself, right? So we're not describing a series of experiments on the way technology interferes with critical thinking, right? We're not discussing how it interferes with critical thinking. That's the key part that makes A wrong. B, asserting that people have become overly dependent on computers for storing information. No, because our article doesn't contain a value judgment. A value judgment is opinion, right? When we're asserting people have become overly dependent on computers for storing information, that's an opinion. But this was not talking about an opinion. C, discuss the idea that humans' capacity for memory is much weaker than it once was. We never discuss humans' capacity for memory, right? And we definitely don't say that it's weaker than it once was, right? We don't make that claim. And then D, share the findings of a study examining the effect of computer use on memory recall. Yes, we're sharing the findings of our study that examined the effect of computer use on memory recall. So D is our answer there. 12, which choice best supports that reliance on computers doesn't necessarily diminish human memory? All right, well, what jumps off to me as just right off the bat is at the end when we start talking about the effects, right? The effects of our information. So I'm going to go ahead and go to 72 to 75 for those lines. And I'm going to see if those would support that. So we have, and even though we may not be taxing our memories to recall distinct facts, right? So we're not taxing our memories to recall these distinct facts. We are still using our memories to consider where the facts are located, right? So while we're not remembering the facts themselves, we're remembering where they're located and how to access them, right? So we still have to remember things. So we've got 72 to 75, right? So we go down, see if we got that right here. And that's going to be our answer. Why? Because that talks about how even though we don't have to remember the information themselves, we have to know where it's stored, right? In which case, our reliance on computers doesn't necessarily diminish our memory because we just have to remember different sets of information, right? So our answer there is going to be D. Question 13. In context, the reference to remembering a relative's birthday mainly serves to what? All right, well, whenever you see something that's asking what a commonplace example serves to, right? It's probably just going to be to illustrate a concept that's more complex into something simpler, right? So we see answer choice D, illustrate the concept of a transactive memory source, right? A memory where you just have to remember who has the information and not the information themselves using a similar situation or a familiar simulation. Situation. So our answer there is going to be D. If I look at choice A, show that people are closely related tend to have shared memories. That's not true, right? People who are closely related aren't going to have, or they may have like some memories that are similar, but they're not going to have a shared memory where like if one person was in Indiana and the other was in Ohio, right? They're not going to be able to remember the same things from those two places. So we have B, demonstrate how people initially developed external sources of memory. No, if we're talking about initial development of external sources of memory, that would be far, far before we're remembering relatives' birthdays, right? We didn't even probably have dates back then. All right, and then C, emphasize the effectiveness and accuracy of transactive memory sources. No, it says nothing about the effectiveness or accuracy of someone relying on a relative to know someone's birthday, right? Because it doesn't tell us if they actually know it or not. It just tells us they're relying on it. So, and then 14, based on the information in the passage, which of the following would be considered a transactive memory source? All right, transactive memory source, remember, that's a memory source where you don't remember the information itself, but you just remember where you can get that information from. So A, a souvenir brought home from a memorable trip. No. B, a written list of a user's passwords, right? So it's a list of a user's passwords for different websites. Well, that's going to be our answer. Why? Because all he has to do is remember where this list is. He doesn't have to remember the passwords because those passwords are on the list. So he just has to remember where he can get this list. So that's going to be the best example there. C is incorrect because the library database that helps users locate specific books. Well, we aren't relying, right? We're not relying on this database to help us locate the specific books in the same way that we would write a list of passwords and rely on that, right? Because we know, well, yes, this database will help us find those books. We still remember the name of the books, right? So we type that name of the book in, we still know it. So we still have to know the name of the book. Whereas here, we don't have to know the password. We just have to know where it is, where the list is. All right, and then 15, as used in line 26, extensions of most nearly means. We go to line 26, circle extensions of, and then read the sentence, and then try and find our answer before we look at our answer choices. Now, computers and technology as well are becoming virtual extensions of our memory. Well, extensions of here will mean closest to additions to, right? The computers and technology are becoming additions to our memory, right? They're adding to it. They're extending it, they're adding to it. So we're going to have B, additions of. It's not delaying our memory, right? It's not length, it's not doing a length of, it's not developments of. It's going to be additions to our memory. Question 16. The discussion of the experiment suggests that people are inclined to think of specific information sources in response to being what? Well, if we remember back up there, people were inclined to think of Google and Yahoo when asked about difficult trivia questions, right? I'm guessing that we're going to have an evidence question. Yep, we're going to have an evidence question for the next one. So I'll go ahead and show you guys the evidence for that, right? But we'll go, you know what, we're just going to go ahead and answer 16 real quick before I get that evidence. So we have A, required to memorize details that will then be made inaccessible. No. B, directed to develop a system for organizing and saving contact. No, that was a different experiment. C, asked to provide facts that are not already familiar to them. Yes, right? Those trivia questions, those are facts that they don't already know. So our answer for 16 will be C. Now we go find that evidence, and that's going to be where we have the Google and Yahoo. So we go find that. We have in the first experiment, participants demonstrated they were more likely to think of computer terms like Yahoo or Google after being asked a set of difficult trivia questions. So my evidence here is going to be from 42 to 45, right? So I'll go find that in my answer choices. Evidence 42 to 45, that'll be answer choice A. Question 18, as used in line 67, employ most nearly means. I'm going to go find line 67. I'm going to circle employ. I'm going to read it, come up with my own answer before I go down and look at my answer choices. So we've got nobody knows now what the effects are of these tools on logical thinking. Students who may have trouble remembering distinct facts, for example, may struggle to employ those facts in critical thinking. Well, the same thing as employ here would be they're going to struggle to utilize those facts in critical thinking. So that's going to be my hypothesis on what the answer is going to be. I see I have that answer choice A. So that'd be my answer. We can go ahead and get rid of the other ones by saying, right, we've got enroll, exert, and assign. So I'll go ahead and plug those in and show you why those would be wrong, right? May struggle to enroll those facts. Well, they're not like signing up for a school district, so we can get rid of enroll. And then what were the other ones? We've got enroll, exert, may struggle to exert those facts. Exert would be if someone's exerting energy or something like that. We wouldn't use that to say someone's going to exert facts. Assign facts, you can't assign facts, right? All right, and then we've got question 19. According to the graph, approximately what percentage of participants remembered both parts of information given to them during the fourth experiment? All right, so we've got our results of experiment 4. We've got remembered both the statements and folder locations, and we see that that's at about 17% of participants, as our y-axis shows. So our answer will be 17%, and that'll be answer choice C. Question 20. Based on the description of Wegner's fourth experiment, what's the most likely explanation for the findings for the largest single group of participants represented in the graph? All right, I'm going to find my largest group. The largest group remembered nothing. Our article, right, said nothing about people who remember nothing. We can't draw a conclusion from that, right? So we're going to go down. We have, based on the description of his fourth experiment, what's the most likely explanation for the findings of people who couldn't remember anything? Well, based on his description, he didn't say anything about that group, right? So there's not enough information to determine the cause of the results for people who didn't remember anything. We don't know. We don't know what the cause for that is, right? We have no idea. All right, so our answer there is going to be D. And now we can go ahead and move on to passage 3. We've got, where does it start? We've got passage 3. Okay, passage 3 is right here. Questions 21 to 31 are based on the following passage and supplementary material. This passage is adopted from Marlene Zuk, Paleo Fantasy, What Evolution Really Tells Us About Sex, Diet, and How We Live, written in 2013 by Marlene Zuk. A female guppy can be sexually mature at 2 months of age and have her first babies just a month later. This unstinting rate of reproduction makes guppies ideally suited for studying the rate of evolution, and David Resnick, a biologist at UC Riverside, has been doing exactly that for the last few decades. People usually think of guppies as colorful aquarium fish, but they also have a life in the real world, inhabiting streams and rivers in tropical places like Trinidad, where Resnick has done his fieldwork. Guppies can experience different kinds of conditions depending on the luck of the draw. A lucky guppy is born above a waterfall or a set of rapids which keep out the predatory fish called pike cichlid, found in calmer downstream waters. As you might expect, the guppy mortality rate, that is, the proportion of individuals that die, is much higher in sites with rapacious cichlids than in those without them. Resnick has shown that if you bring the fish into the lab and let them breed there, the guppies from the sites with many predators become sexually mature when they are younger and smaller than do guppies from the predator-free sites. In addition, the litters of baby guppies produced by mothers from the high-risk streams are larger, but each individual baby is smaller than those produced by their counterparts. The disparity makes sense because if you are at risk of being eaten, being able to have babies sooner and spreading your energy reserves over a lot of them makes it more likely that you will manage to pass on some of your genes before you meet your fate. Resnick and other scientists also demonstrated that these traits are controlled by the guppy's genes, not by the environment in which they grow up. How quickly, though, could these differences in how the two kinds of guppies evolved and how the two kinds of guppies lived their lives have evolved? Because there are numerous tributaries of the streams in Trinidad, with guppies living in some but not all of them, Resnick realized that he could, as he put it in a 2008 paper, treat streams like giant test tubes by introducing guppies or predators to places they had not originally occurred, and then watch as natural selection acted on the guppies. This kind of real-world manipulation of nature is called experimental evolution, and it is growing increasingly popular among scientists working with organisms that reproduce quickly enough for humans to be able to see the outcome within our lifetimes. Along with his students and colleagues, Resnick removed groups of guppies from their predator-ridden lives below the waterfall and released them into previously guppy-free streams above the falls. Although small predatory killfish occurred in these new sites, these fish do not pose anything close to the danger of the kitchlids. Then the scientists waited for nature to do its work, and they brought the descendants of the transplanted fish back to the lab to examine their reproduction. After just 11 years, the guppies released, and the new streams had evolved to mature later and have fewer, bigger offspring in each litter, just like the guppies that naturally occurred in the kitchlid-free streams. Other studies of guppies in Trinidad have shown evolutionary change in as few as 2.5 years, or a little over 4 generations, with more time required for genetic shifts in traits such as the ability to form schools and less time for changes in the colorful spots and stripes on a male's body. All right, now we've got 2 graphs, but we can go ahead and get into question 21. The first paragraph mainly serves to what? Well, if we go back to the first paragraph, we see that it says a female guppy can be sexually mature at 2 months of age and have their babies just a month later. This rate of reproduction makes guppies ideally suited for studying the rate of evolution, right? So we're describing why that organism is useful in the study. So we've got A, establish the reason why a certain species was selected for scientific observation, and that right there is going to be our answer. So our answer for 21 will be A. All right, and we can see B is incorrect because illustrate the value of studying the offspring of a particular animal shortly after birth. We're not studying an offspring shortly after birth. Introduce a theory at the center of an ongoing debate. That's not what it talks about. And then D, offer a rationale for the prevalence of a new field of scientific inquiry. There's no new field that we're talking about, so we can get rid of D. All right, question 22. In describing the living conditions of guppies, the author indicates that a lucky guppy in line 14 is one that is what? Well, that's one that has no natural predators, right? It doesn't have any in its environment. So it's going to be B, it inhabits an environment that provides natural protection from its predators, right? Those that live above the falls have natural protection from those kitchlids, which are the major predators. So our answer for 22 will be B, right? And then we can get rid of C, D, and A, right? And then question 23, which choice provides the best evidence for the conclusion that the streams used by Resnick's team in their real-world study were not entirely free of predators? So that means that there are predators there. And if we go back, we remember in lines 57 to 59, and I'll take you there, that there are other predators. They just don't pose anything close to the danger of the kitchlids. So we see that we have that here. We have, although small predatory killfish occurred in these new sites, so there were predators, these fish do not pose anything close to the danger of the kitchlids. So now our answer then will be lines 57 to lines 59, lines 59. So we'll go down, we'll find our answer choice there. We see that that's D. All right, next we got question 24. In lines 43 to 44, Resnick uses the phrase giant test tubes to suggest what? Well, that's going to be to suggest that certain streams can what? All right, well, giant test tubes to suggest certain streams can provide suitable environmental conditions, promote cooperative behaviors in specimens. No, the streams aren't providing cooperative behaviors in specimens, right? And then C, expedite the rate of genetic changes. He never says that. Solve widespread environmental problems. Nope. We can get rid of C and D. We know it's A, right? It provides suitable experimental conditions, right? Those natural test tubes are providing the suitable experimental conditions for his experiment. And then we have 25, as used in line 49, popular most nearly means. Well, we're going to go to line 49. We're going to circle popular, and then we're going to read the sentence and find what word it most nearly means. We have this kind of real-world manipulation of a nature is called experimental evolution, and it is growing increasingly popular among scientists working with organisms that reproduce quickly enough for humans to be able to see the outcome within our lifetimes. All right, well, it's growing increasingly popular, right? Growing increasingly widespread. More scientists are using it, right? So it's growing increasingly widespread among scientists. As we go down, we see we do have widespread. Let's say we didn't come up with widespread when we were coming up with our own answer. We came up with something else. Well, then we'd see we have A, right? It's becoming increasingly accessible. No, it was always accessible, right? There was no change in geography that caused it to be now accessible when it wasn't. Suitable, Well, there's nothing that, once again, there's nothing that would have changed, right, that would make it now increasingly more suitable, right? There's no geographical changes where it's now more suitable. And then it's grown increasingly more likable among scientists. That would be a terrible word to use, right? This is an academic paper. We're not going to use likable. Honestly, I'm not even sure. I mean, likable probably is a word, but I mean, it's really not one that we'd use in a scientific setting like this, right? It doesn't, when he says that it's growing increasingly popular, he's talking about the quantity that it's used, right? It's used more often, it's more widespread. It's increasingly widespread. Question 26. Which finding, if accurate, would undermine his findings? A. Guppies examined in other parts of the globe exhibit genetic shifts and traits at a different rate from that exhibited by the guppies Resnick examined. That would not undermine his findings, right? If guppies examined in other parts of the globe, those could have some different genetics, right? Some slightly different genetic changes that could cause their shifts, right? That could cause their genetic shifts and traits to happen at a slightly different rate. Also, depending on the amount of predators, right? If there's way more in one versus another, right? There's a lot of different things, right? And then we have B, the new site into which Resnick released the guppies is inhabited by fish that are found to be as predatory as the cichlids in the original sites. That would, right? That would undermine his findings because then there would be no difference between those two sites, right? So that would most certainly undermine his findings. We know our answer there will be B. All right, now we got question 27. It can most reasonably be inferred from the passage that the experiments in Trinidad have shown which of the following about guppies. Some genetic traits will evolve more readily than others. Yes, and we have to find evidence for that in 28 anyways, so I'll go and show you guys why this is correct. Well, if we look at the end, what we remember is that it said in our last couple sentences, other studies in Trinidad have shown evolutionary change in as few as 2.5 years, over as little as 4 generations, with more time required for genetic shifts in traits such as the ability to form schools and less time for changes in colorful spots and stripes on a male's body. So that's showing that those genetic shifts can occur at different rates for different traits. Right, so we know our answer there is going to be D for our evidence, 67 to 62, and we know that our answer for 27 will be A. All right, so now we can go and move on to question 29. According to figure 1, guppies living in the south slope high predation environment produced a mean number of offspring between what? So we go to figure 1, south slope high predation. South slope high predation is going to be this graph here. They produced a mean number of offspring between 6 and 7 is what we see there. So our answer will be D for that one. Now we got question 30. Which conclusion about the mean mass of guppy embryos is best supported by figure 2? So we go find figure 2. All right, what's the best conclusion? Well, I see that in my low predation environments, I have a higher mean embryo mass, right? See this higher mean embryo mass than those in high predation environments. All right, so we know that our mean embryo mass is going to be higher in our low predation environments. So we can go find that answer. We've got the slope was a better indication of mean embryo mass than predation level. No. The mean embryo mass born in the north slope exceeded the mean in the south slope. No, those weren't really what we were looking for. C, the predation level observed in each environment had more of an effect on mean embryo mass than did slope location. Yes, the predation level was what caused those big differences in the graph, right? This versus this, right? That had to do with predation level, not which slope they were found in. All right, now we've got question 31. The data presented in the figures 1 and 2 best support the conclusion that compared with guppies from high predation environments, guppies from low predation environments were more likely to what? Well, guppies in the low predation environments, we remember, they were more likely, and I'll go ahead and show you in the data too. So low predation environments, we have here and here, right? So these ones right here, we see that they have a lower number of offspring, but then we also see that they have higher mean embryo mass, right? So they're likely to be larger, but have a lower number of offspring. So those from the low predation environment are likely to have fewer offspring and reach full maturity sooner. No, we don't talk about full maturity. B, be part of a smaller litter, yes, and have a greater mean embryo mass, yes. So our answer for 31 will be B. All right, now we can go ahead and move on to questions 32 to 42, which is passage 4. This passage is adopted from a speech delivered in 1838 by Sarah T. Smith at the Second Anti-Slavery Convention of American Women. We are told that it is not within the province of women to discuss the subject of slavery, that it is a political question, and we are stepping out of our sphere when we take part in its discussion. It is not true that it is merely a political question. It is likewise a question of justice, of humanity, of morality, of religion, a question which, while it involves considerations of immense importance to the welfare and prosperity of our country, enters deeply into the home concerns, the everyday feelings of millions of our fellow beings. Whether the laborer shall receive the reward of his labor or be driven daily to unrequited toil, whether he shall walk erect in the dignity of conscious manhood or be reckoned among the beasts which perish, whether his bones and sinews shall be his own or another's, whether his child shall receive the protection of its natural guardian or be ranked among the livestock of the estate, to be disposed of as the caprice or interest of the master may dictate. These considerations are all involved in the question of liberty or slavery, and is a subject comprehending interests of such magnitude merely a political question, and one in which women can take no part without losing something of the modesty and gentleness which are her most appropriate ornaments? And may not the ornament of a meek and quiet spirit exist with an upright mind and enlightened intellect? And must women necessarily be less gentle because her heart is open to the claims of humanity, or less modest because she feels for the degradation of her enslaved sisters and would stretch forth her hand for their rescue? By the Constitution of the United States, the whole physical power of the North is pledged for the suppression of domestic insurrections. And should the slaves, maddened by oppression, endeavor to shake off the yoke of the taskmaster, the men of the North are bound to make common cause with the tyrant and put down at the point of bayonet every effort on the part of the slave for the attainment of his freedom. And when the father, husband, son, and brother shall have left their homes to mingle in the unholy war, to become executioners of the brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands, will the mother, wife, daughter, and sister feel that they have no interest in this subject? Will it be easy to convince them that it is no concern of theirs, that their homes are rendered desolate, and their habitations the abodes of wretchedness? Surely this consideration is of itself sufficient to arouse the slumbering energies of women. For the overthrow of a system which thus threatens to lay in ruins the fabric of her domestic happiness, and she will not be deterred from the performance of her duty to herself, her family, and her country by the cry of political question. But admitting it to be a political question, have we no interest in the welfare of our country? May we not permit a thought to stray beyond the narrow limits of our own family circle and of the present hour? May we not breathe a sigh over the miseries of our countrymen, nor utter a word of remonstrance against the unjust laws that are crushing them to the earth? Must we witness the headlong rage or headless folly with which our nation is rushing onward toward destruction, and not seek to arrest its downward course? Shall we silently behold the land which we love with all the heartwarm affection of children, rendering a hissing and a reproach throughout the world by this system which is already tolling the death bell of her decease among the nations? No. The events of the last 2 years have cast their dark shadows before, overclouding the bright prospects of the future, enshrouding the destinies of our country in more than midnight gloom, and we cannot remain inactive. Our country is as dear to us as to our proudest statesmen, and the more closely our hearts cling to our altars and our homes, the more fervent are our aspirations that every inhabitant of the land may be protected in his fireside enjoyments by just and equal laws, that the foot of the tyrant may no longer invade the domestic sanctuary, nor his hand tear asunder those whom God himself has united by the most holy ties. Let our course, then, still be onward. All right, question 32. Smith's main purpose in the passage is to what? All right, well, her main purpose is to talk about how the cause of abolition, right, should be important to women, and that it's just an important cause for women, right? They should have the right to be outspoken about it. This is important for them to speak about. So we have A, accuse fellow abolitionists of overlooking the contributions women have made to the movement. No, she's not accusing fellow abolitionists, right, of overlooking contributions women made to the movement. So we can get rid of A. B, argue that the causes of abolition and women's rights are continuations of the spirit of the American Revolution. No, we don't really ever talk about women's rights as continuations of the American Revolution. C, make the case that women's rights are meaningless while slavery exists. She never makes that case, so we can get rid of C. And then D, encourage women to see their participation in the abolitionist cause as just and important, and that'll be our answer, right? She talks about how it's important because it's going to affect all these things, right? And we have to solve it now, and we have to abolish slavery now, because otherwise the North will have to help the South fight insurrections according to the Constitution. And it's a just cause because she talks about how the laborer needs to receive the fruit of his labor. And then question 33, which statement provides the best description of a technique that Smith uses throughout the passage to advance her point? We have A, she presents claims in the form of rhetorical questions that mostly have implicit negative answers. And yes, she does do that, and I'll go ahead and show you a couple of examples real quick. So if we go up here, we see we've got one right here, right? And then one right here. We've also got some over, let's find a couple others. One here, right? One here. She does it throughout the whole passage, right? So I'll go ahead and give you an example showing that it's a negative implicit answer. We'll use this one. We've got, and when the father, husband, son, and brother shall have left their homes to mingle in the unholy war, to become executioners of their brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands, will the mother, wife, daughter, and sister feel that they have no interest in the subject? And the answer to that, right, would be no. That's a negative implicit answer, right? Because it says, would they have no interest in the subject? Well, no, they would have a lot of interest in that subject, right? All right. So that shows why 33 is A. Now we've got 34. How does Smith develop her argument about slavery as a political question, line 3, over the course of the passage? Well, if we remember when we go back to line 3, she dismisses it as being too narrow because it does affect things in the home, it affects things other than politics, right? But then at the end, if we go back, right, we see that admitting it to be a political question, have we no interest in the welfare of our country? Right? So she first discusses it as being too narrow, right? So we see that we've got B, she dismisses the designation as too narrow, but then she demonstrates the relevance of it being a political question to her audience, right? So the political relevance. So our answer there is going to be B. All right, now we've got question 35. We've got which choice best summarizes the first paragraph? Well, if we go back to the first paragraph, we can just get a quick little reminder of what it was about, right? So we see that we've got it talking about how it's more than a political question, right? All these other things that it affects, the justice of it, right? That the laborer needs to receive the reward of his labor, right? These considerations all need to be taken into account when discussing liberty or slavery. So we've got A, Smith explains a conventional viewpoint and presents evidence supporting it. No, because her viewpoint isn't conventional at that time when this was written, right? Because they wanted women to stay out of the political sphere at that time. And then B, Smith rejects a claim and elaborates on her reasons for doing so. Well, we know, yes, she does reject the claim that it's only a political question and that women should not be involved in that political question, and she elaborates on her reasons for rejecting that claim, right? So our answer there is going to be B. Smith introduces her subject and provides historical background for understanding it. We know that that's not true because Smith does not provide historical background for understanding, right, the subject. This is more of her rejecting a claim, elaborating on the reasons for doing so, right? We're not really giving historical background for understanding anything. And then D, Smith identifies a problem and proposes steps to remedy it. Well, she does kind of identify a problem, but more so, she's rejecting a claim, right? And proposes steps to remedy it. No, she just kind of elaborates and justifies her reasons for doing so, right? For rejecting that claim. So our answer there is going to be B. Question 36. In the passage, Smith argues that it is possible for women to engage in which activity? So we've got A, acting according to humanitarian principles while preserving their femininity. Yes, right? So, and then I can go ahead and show you why the other ones are wrong real quick. Adhering to personal morality while being politically neutral. She never argues for political neutrality. C, contributing to the family's financial security. We never discussed that. And then D, resisting calls for war while opposing slavery. Well, she isn't resisting calls for war, right? All right, so we got A. Now we're asked for evidence in our next question, so I'll go ahead and find that for you. And I'm going to find that evidence before I really even look at the answer choices. You don't have to do that, but I just will. So we've got according to humanitarian principles while preserving their femininity. All right, well, I remember that right around here, right, it talked about women being open to claims of humanity, but how they aren't less modest, right, as a result of that, or less gentle, which are both feminine qualities, right? So I'll go ahead and read that sentence. We have, may not the ornament of a meek and quiet spirit exist within an upright mind and enlightened intellect, and must women necessarily be less gentle because her heart is open to the claims of humanity, or less modest because she feels for the degradation of her enslaved sisters and will stretch forth her hand for their rescue? So that's going to be from 33, right? That's going to be our on that end. We're going to have from 26 to 33 about, right? But I'd even be willing to take going from and, right? So 26 to 33 would be ideal, but if we have 28 to 33, that works as well. So I'll go look at my answer choices. And yep, I've got 26 to 33 right there, and that will be my answer. All right, now I've got question 38. According to Smith, the U.S. Constitution requires which action on the part of northern free states if slaves were to revolt? Well, it said that the northern free states would be required to make basically make partners with the tyrants, right? Make partners with the South and put down any insurrections on the part of the slaves, right? So the northern states would not have to sever ties, but constitutionally, they would not have to give shelter to refugees. They would have to help the slave states fight the slaves' rebellion, right? That's what she says. And then D, the northern states would have to provide financial assistance to the rebelling slaves. No, she never says that. All right, 39. In context with the main effect of Smith's use of the word tyrant in lines 40 and 83, what? We've got A, it identifies a specific individual as oppressive. No, when she uses the word tyrant in lines 40 to 83, I'll go show you in 1 minute, but she's actually talking about the South states as a whole, right? Not one individual. B, it highlights the threat of aggression from abroad. No, abroad would be overseas. We're talking about a domestic thing here. And then C, it critiques the limited rules for women in anti-slavery movements. No, right? She's referring to southern states when she says tyrant. D, it emphasizes the unjustness of slavery. Yes. And I'll go ahead and show you tyrant in lines 40 and 83 real quick. So right here, we see North are bound to make common cause with the tyrant and put down at the point of bayonet every effort on the part of the slave. She's referring to tyrant as the southern slave states there to show how unjust slavery is by calling the slave states tyrants. And then here we have that the foot of the tyrant may no longer invade the domestic sanctuary, right? That the foot of the slave-holding South will no longer have room in the home, right? So emphasizing that unjustness of slavery by calling those slave states tyrants, right? As used in line 52, slumbering most nearly means what? Go to 52, we're going to circle it and then come up with our answer before we look at the answer choices. That way we aren't swayed by answer choices. So we've got, surely this consideration is of itself sufficient to arouse the slumbering energies of women for the overthrow of a system which thus threatens to lay in ruins the fabric of her domestic happiness. All right, well here, slumbering energies, it really just means that, right, the energy isn't there, right? They're just kind of still waiting, right? The energy, they're kind of dormant. They're not really doing anything yet, right? But she's hoping that this consideration that she's writing about will wake them up, right? Cause them to no longer be dormant, but to now be active. So we can go down into our word choices, right? So we see we do have dormant, right? Say you didn't come up with dormant. Let's say that you came up with a different word, right? And that word wasn't on here. Well, it's not going to be drowsy, right? It's not going to be the drowsy energies, right? No one would say that the energies are drowsy, right? They're slumbering, which means that they can be awakened, right? And then we have unconscious. Well, it doesn't say they're unconscious. It just says that they aren't active right now, but it doesn't mean it's unconscious. Lethargic. All right, so lethargic would be more used when talking about physical motion, right? Someone just woke up and they're barely moving, right? And I know slumbering can kind of give that idea too, but what we're really talking about here is the idea that their energies, right, they're dormant. They aren't doing anything yet, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that they're actually physically tired. It just means that they aren't necessarily doing anything yet, right? So slumbering here, it's really used to just show that they aren't doing anything actively. So our answer there is dormant. All right, 41. In the passage, Smith most strongly suggests that slavery affects the United States by what? Well, she talks about how it's lowering the country's reputation in the international community. And our next question is going to ask us for, it's going to ask us for evidence. So I can go ahead and show you why that's going to be correct, right? And I'll just go ahead and quick show you why B, C, and D are wrong. Leading many women to disavow their allegiance to the country. No, she never suggests that slavery causes women to disavow their allegiance to the country. Or at least it's not as strong of a suggestion as answer choice A. And then C, causing violent conflicts in many areas of the country. No, she never really points to that really as much. She just says if there were, that northern states would have to help fight them. And then we have D, weakening the authority of the country's government. She never makes that argument really, at least not as strongly as she suggests. She suggests answer choice A. So I'll go ahead and look at our evidence for that. That's going to be where she talks about how we are almost going off the world stage. Let's see if we can find where that is. We've got, okay, right here. So we've got, shall we silently behold the land which we love with all heartwarm affection of children, rendering a hissing and a reproach throughout the world by this system, which is already tolling the death bell of her decease among the nations, right? So that's from going to 73, we're starting at 68. So we got 68 to 73, right? So basically what's that saying is that slavery is causing the death bell, right? So it means America being close to death, right? America almost dying among the nations, right? So this great power almost coming to its death among the nations as a result of the civil unrest and the conflict between the North and the South. So our answer there is going to be 68 to 73, which is answer choice C. All right, so now we can go ahead and move on to the final passage. We've got questions 43 to 52 are based on the following passages. Passage 1 is adopted from Brian Handwork, a new antibiotic found in dirt can kill drug-resistant bacteria, written in 2015 by the Smithsonian Institute, or that's where it was published. Passage 2 is adopted from David Livermore. This new antibiotic is cause for celebration and caution, and it was published in 2015 by Telegraph Media Group Limited. All right, passage 1. Pathogens are acquiring resistance faster than we can introduce new antibiotics, and this is causing a human health crisis, says biochemist Kim Lewis of Northeastern University. Lewis is part of a team that recently unveiled a promising antibiotic born from a new way to tap the powers of soil microorganisms. In animal test, Tioxobactin proved effective at killing off a wide variety of disease-causing bacteria, even those that had developed immunity to other drugs. The scientists' best efforts to create mutant bacteria with resistance to the drug failed, meaning Tioxobactin could function effectively for decades before pathogens naturally evolved to resist it. Natural microbial substances from soil bacteria and fungi have been at the root of most antibiotic drug development during the past century. Not only about 1% of these organisms can be grown in a lab, the rest in staggering numbers have remained uncultured and of limited use to medical science until now. Instead of trying to figure out the ideal conditions for each and every one of the millions of microorganisms out there in the environment, or millions of organisms out there in the environment, to allow them to grow in the lab, we simply grow them in their natural environments where they already have the conditions they need for growth, Lewis says. To do this, the team designed a gadget that sandwiches a soil sample between two membranes, each perforated with pores that allow molecules like nutrients to diffuse through but don't allow the passage of cells. We just use it to trick the bacteria into thinking that they are in their natural environment, Lewis says. The team isolated 10,000 strains of uncultured soil bacteria and prepared extracts from them that could be tested against nasty pathogenic bacteria. Tioxobactin emerged as the most promising drug. Mice infected with bacteria that cause upper respiratory tract infections, including Staphylococcus aureus and Streptococcus pneumoniae, were treated with Tioxobactin, and the drug knocked out the infections with no noticeable toxic effects. It's likely that Tioxobactin is effective because of the way it targets disease. The drug breaks down the bacterial cell walls by attacking the lipid molecules that the cells create organically. Many other antibiotics target the bacteria's proteins, and the genes that encode those proteins can mutate to produce different structures. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and answer the questions that are in the beginning on passage 1, and then I'll read passage 2 once I need to. All right, the first paragraph of passage 1 primarily serves to what? Well, if we go to the first paragraph of passage 1, we see that it says, pathogens are acquiring resistance faster than we can introduce new antibiotics, and this is causing a human health crisis. Right? So if we go down, we look at our options. We have present a claim that's supported and developed over the course of a passage. Nope. Introduce a controversy. We're not introducing a controversy. Right? What we are doing is we're identifying a problem. Right? A human health crisis is what it says. Right? The bacteria are evolving or mutating faster than we can find new bacteria to treat diseases. Right? So that's going to be our identifying a problem. We say it's a human health crisis that the research discussed in the passage may help to address. Right? This new research shows that we can now find new treatments faster. Right? And these new treatments are going to work better. So our answer there is going to be C. The author of passage 1 suggests that an advantage of the method Lewis's team used to grow microorganisms is that what? Well, the big advantage, right? The big advantage of the way that they used to grow microorganisms is that they were now able to tap into all these other organisms, right? So we have A, identifies the requirements for soil bacteria to thrive and replicates those features in artificial soil, or B, enables soil bacteria to take in more nutrients. No, right? We're only taking in the same amount, it said, right? Through those pores that don't let cells go in, though. C, directly affect the cell walls of bacteria rather than the proteins those bacteria produce. Well, that's not the advantage used to grow them, right? That's not the advantage used to grow them. That's how it's attacking, right? It attacks the cell walls of bacteria rather than the proteins. And then D, allows researchers to make use of soil bacteria that they had been previously unable to exploit. Yep, they previously weren't able to take out a lot of those bacteria, right? Because it was just too hard to get them to grow. But now with this new method, they can make use of soil bacteria that they weren't able to before. And we know that A is wrong because it says identifies the requirements for soil bacteria to thrive and replicates those in artificial soil. But what they aren't doing actually is they're not identifying these requirements for soil bacteria. They're letting those requirements, quote unquote, that nature has already provided, right? Nature's already fulfilling those requirements. So they're not actually replicating those on themselves in artificial soil. They're taking the soil, right? So it's not artificial soil. They're taking that soil out from the ground. And that's allowing them to get the soil that they were previously unable to exploit. Now, where's our evidence for this? Well, right off the bat, when I see but only, and then I see now, I'm thinking, okay, we're contrasting what happened in the past by saying but only, and then now we're talking about what's happening in the future. Now we can harvest more samples, right? So I'm going to go ahead and look at 17 to 21, starting at but only about 1% of these organisms can be grown in a lab. The rest, in staggering numbers, have remained uncultured and of limited use to medical science until now. So now they are of use, right? Now we can harvest them. So that's going to be my answer there. So that'll be choice A. All right, now we've got 46. I see I have passage 2, so I'm going to go read passage 2. Many good antibiotic families, penicillin, streptomycin, tetracycline, come from soil fungi and bacteria, and it has been long suspected that if we could grow more types of bacteria from soil or from exotic environments such as deep oceans, then we might find new natural antibiotics. In a recent study, researchers Kim Lewis and others found that they could isolate and grow individual soil bacteria, including types that can't normally be grown in the laboratory, and soil itself, which supplied critical nutrients and minerals. Once the bacteria reached a critical mass, they could be transferred to the lab and their cultivation continued. This simple and elegant methodology is their most important finding to my mind, for it opens a gateway to cultivating a wealth of potentially antibiotic-producing bacteria that have never been grown before. The first new antibiotic that they found by this approach, tioxobactin from a bacterium called Eleftheria terrae, is less exciting to my mind, though it doesn't look bad. Tioxobactin killed gram-positive bacteria such as S. aureus in the laboratory and cured experimental infection in mice. It also killed the tuberculosis bacterium, which is important because there is a real problem with resistant tuberculosis in the developing world. It was also difficult to select tioxobactin resistance. So what are my caveats? Well, I see 3. First, tioxobactin isn't a potential panacea. It doesn't kill the gram-negative opportunists, as it's too big to cross their complex cell wall. Secondly, scaling to commercial manufacturing will be challenging since the bacteria making the antibiotic are so difficult to grow. And third, it's in its early days yet. As with any antibiotic, tioxobactin now faces the long haul of clinical trials. Phase 1 to see what you can safely give the patient, Phase 2 to see if it cures infections, and Phase 3 to compare its efficacy to that of standard care treatment. That's going to take 5 years and approximately 500 million pounds, and these are numbers we must find ways to reduce, while not compromising safety, if we're to keep ahead of bacteria, which can evolve far more swiftly and cheaply. All right, question 46. The author of passage 2 would most likely agree with which statement about the development of tioxobactin? All right, well, he would agree that it is, let's see, we have choice A, it reveals some antibiotics are effective against gram-negative. No, he explicitly said that it's not effective against gram-negative because it can't cross the complex cell wall. B, it shows conventional methods can still yield new types of antibiotics. Well, this is not a conventional method, right? This was a new method, right? It was a new way to harvest. And then C, it casts doubt on the practicality of searching for new antibiotics in exotic environments. We don't really talk about exotic environments, so we can get rid of C. D, it confirms a long-held belief about a potential source of new antibiotics. Now, how do we know that that's correct? Because when we go back up to passage 2, we see in the beginning, he says that it has long been suspected that if we could grow more types of bacteria from soil or from exotic environments, such as deep oceans, we might find new and natural antibiotics, right? So he's saying that what was discussed in passage 1 confirms that long-held belief about potential sources of new antibiotics. Now we're asked, 47, in line 79, caveats most nearly means. We go to line 79, square caveats, and then read the sentence and find what it means. So what are my caveats, right? And then he talks about 3 misgivings, right? 3 reasons that he doesn't see it as necessarily the most incredible thing of all time, right? So what are his 3 caveats? Caveats there is going to mean misgivings, right? Answer choice C. If we didn't come up with misgivings, right, we'd say we came up with a different word. Say we came up with a different word. Let's say we thought caveats meant something like, let me try to come up with something. Yeah, there's not really much else we could have came up with, to be honest. But let's say we came up with something else and it wasn't on here, right? we can get rid of exceptions, right? Because he says, so what are my 3 exceptions? But then he's not really saying anything's an exception to what, right? What's it an exception to, right? He doesn't state a rule, and these are exceptions to that rule, right? So we know it wouldn't be exceptions. Restrictions. So what are my 3 restrictions? Well, what he describes aren't restrictions, right? One of his reasons is that it would cost 500 million pounds to do it. Well, it doesn't mean it's not going to get done. It'll still get done. It's just going to be expensive. So restrictions would be incorrect there. And then explanations, he's not explaining anything, right? All he's doing is stating his misgivings, his caveats, right? The reasons that he thinks that this isn't necessarily the most incredible invention of all time, right? All right, 48. In the last sentence of passage 2, the author uses the phrase 5 years, 500 million pounds, primarily to what? Well, that's going to be to A, emphasize the scale of the effort needed to make tioxobactin available for consumer use, right? 500 million pounds is a lot of money, and 5 years is kind of a long time when you're talking about all these trials and all this time researchers have to spend in the lab, right? So he's emphasizing that scale of effort, that this isn't an immediate solution, right? And then we know B is incorrect because it says criticize the level of funding that the government has committed. We don't talk about government funding, so we can get rid of that. C, underscore the amount of time and money that has already been spent researching. No, right? That's about time and money that will be spent, not has already been spent. Not a whole lot has actually probably been spent on this, right? Because this is all kind of stemming from a Northeastern University study. And then D, compare the amount of money spent developing tioxobactin with the amount spent developing other antibiotics. He does not compare it to the amount spent on other antibiotics. All right, so now we got question 49. Which choice best describes the relationship between passage 1 and 2? All right, well, before I look at the answer choices, I'm going to try and come up with my answer choice. So passage 1 is presenting the findings, right? And passage 2 is evaluating those findings, evaluating their significance, both positive and potentially not necessarily negative, but what are his caveats, right? So kind of evaluating it. All right, so passage 1, introducing the topic, right? Introducing the scientific research, and then passage 2 is evaluating it. All right, so we have A, passage 2 offers an evaluation of the significance of the research discussed in passage 1. Yep, that's what we came up with. That'll be our answer. We can go ahead and show why B is wrong. Passage 2 suggests a modification to the methodology. It does not. It does not suggest a modification to the methodology discussed in passage 1. C, passage 2 uses concrete examples to illustrate concepts. We don't use concrete examples to illustrate concepts considered in passage 1. D, passage 2 takes a dismissive stance regarding the findings mentioned in passage 1. Okay, you may be tempted to pick this, but here's the thing. What makes this wrong is that he does not take a dismissive stance on it, right? He says that these findings are good, right? But he does say that they aren't necessarily the most, right, incredible thing, right? They can't use it immediately. It's going to take time, right? It can't kill gram-negative, but it can kill gram-positive. So he's not dismissing it. He still says it's important because it confirmed that we can do this, right? But he does say it's not necessarily going to be an immediate end-all, be-all solution. So that's why D would be wrong. All right, question 50. Both passages make the point that tioxobactin could be useful in what? Well, both passages make the point that tioxobactin could be useful in, let's see, we got A, standardizing the future development of antibiotics produced in laboratories. No, right? He doesn't talk about the future development of them produced in laboratories. In fact, we talk about how they're cultivated from the natural environments. B, combating infections no longer responding to treatment with other antibiotics. Yes, both of them say that this is important because treatments such as tuberculosis, right? They don't respond necessarily to other antibiotics, but they will to this potentially, right? So that's why our answer there will be B. It's not going to be C, controlling the spread of pathogenic soil fungi. We're not controlling the spread of pathogenic soil fungi. And then D, shaping a new method of studying the effectiveness of antibiotics. We're not really shaping a new method of studying it, right? But they do, or at least not in both, right? That's the important part here. Both passages, one of them might make point A, might make point C, might make point D, but both of them make B, and both of them do not make A, C, or D. All right, question 51. Information in passage 2 best supports which conclusion about the mice in the experiment described in passage 1? All right, information in passage 2 best supports which conclusion about the mice in the experiment described in passage 1? We've got A, exposure to tioxobactin made them less susceptible to subsequent upper respiratory tract infections. We never discuss subsequent upper respiratory tract infections. We only discuss the ones that they have and then that they are cured. We don't talk about ones that could potentially happen after that. So we can get rid of A. B, gram-positive bacteria enhance the effectiveness of tioxobactin against their upper respiratory tract infections. No, right? Or, I'm sorry, yes. Yes, right. Gram-positive bacteria, right, that we discussed in passage 1, enhanced the effectiveness of tioxobactin against their upper respiratory infections. Or hang on, no, I'm sorry, B is incorrect. I read that wrong. Okay, yep, B is incorrect because it says gram-positive bacteria enhance the effectiveness of it against their upper respiratory tract infections. No, this tioxobactin, it killed that gram-positive bacteria. It killed it, right? Gram-positive bacteria was the bad thing, so we know B is incorrect. I'm sorry about that mix-up, right? All right, now we got C. The respiratory tract infections were likely not caused by gram-negative bacteria. Yes, that is our answer, okay? How do we know that? Because in passage 2, it tells us that tioxobactin is not effective against gram-negative bacteria, but it is against positive. Therefore, we know those upper respiratory tract infections discussed in passage 1, they weren't caused by gram-negative bacteria because then tioxobactin would not have cured the upper respiratory tract infections. So we know our answer there is C. I'm so sorry about going down that wrong path on B. I misread the answer choice. Our answer is C here, right? And I just explained why. D, tioxobactin attack the proteins rather than of the bacteria. No, right? We discussed how it attacks the lipids, not the proteins. So we can get rid of D. 52, what choice provides the best evidence to the previous question? We can go ahead and find it. It's in passage 2, right? It tells us that it's not effective against gram-negative. We see that that is, let's see, so it's in passage 2. We've got it right here. It doesn't kill the gram-negative opportunists, as it is too big to cross their complex cell wall. So I see that that ends at 82, and I see it starts at 80. So my answer for the evidence will be 80 to 82. So I'll go ahead and find that, and that will be answer choice D. Thank you for watching Preeminent Test Prep. Make sure to subscribe, like, and share as we will be releasing more videos to help you prepare for the SAT.